This song is Weakness by Opeth. Again, the strange thing is that my mind slipped, and for some reason I didn't press the record button for the last video. This happens. We can't be too official about these things, but certainly I think my thoughts are still valuable, and obviously I'm speaking in a certain manner off the top of my head, although, obviously the clauses in the English language have a certain rehearsal to them, hence, say if you watch the movie Brothers Grimm, where the French complain that the English sound like they're murdering someone when they speak, I actually find that an interesting point. Certainly that resonated with me, but to say that I'm copying off people's thoughts is completely incorrect. I don't think anybody actually said that, and personally I don't think it is true. But the interesting thing, and yes, this song is called Weakness by Opeth. It's a rather good song. The song before it is actually called The Ending Credit, and he says it's a naive song, and also I remember Opeth doing Opeth Does Jazz, I saw on YouTube, but it never surfaced again. Perhaps they wanted it removed. Some people do want some of their works removed for certain obligatory reasons, or otherwise. But it's a bit like Vangelis. He did an album, sort of an album. I can't remember what it's called. Hypothesis, I think it's called. Yes. That's a good, interesting piece. I had a good listen to that. But people do sometimes get sensitive about the sort of things that people are harvesting from their thought pools. Certainly, harvest is how do I define a harvest? But condemn me if you want. But I'm a pretty original thinker. It's just the way I conduct myself that people get confused by. But anyway, the thought that I came up with was, and I did pretty much come up with it on the spot, was the domino effect is a curious phenomenon, not as a phenomenon, but as a symbolic gateway in the mind. I've changed the word to gateway from mental block. But there's no one to catch you when you fall if you're the end domino. If you put the dominoes in a circle, it's not a crop circle. If you knock the first domino down in history, does the last domino fall down? A domino is made out of metal. Do dominoes originate in China? I do not know. And things like that. And certainly, if you have mechanisms, pivot mechanisms and cam mechanisms, is something actually that we saw in high school is a cam mechanism. I was never so good at that because I always originated my own bizarre, fanciful way of constructing some technology that could never exist. I remember that in wood technology, but anyway, I don't know if they liked me or not. It's not really important. This is not about condemning people. This is just about getting through my existence the way I choose and realizing that yes, other people have a seat. And it's like Dr. 81 says on YouTube, if you have that seat and blah blah blah. It's not a bloody throne room. But anyway, so this is the thing about the gene pool. If you knock one person down, what happens to the last person? Is there one man standing at the end? Domino effect is a curious terminology to say that the communism spreads, isn't it? I do find that quite interesting. What is it, some kind of plague? Do the dominoes become infected? And that is in fact a thought I didn't come up with in the last video, but I simply visualised it. Never have I ever actually witnessed mould on a domino. In fact, wouldn't it be interesting if there were lots of spores, like in Star Trek, that are actually manipulating our minds and changing the way that we gamble so that certain this is bollocks, of course. I'm quite happy to spout bollocks occasionally, but it shouldn't discredit some of the other ideas that I have put forward in my own words. And certainly, according to copyright, it's sometimes the specific expression of idea, but I'm so specific I don't even look at the idea half the time. Hence, I suppose people do put down work that isn't sufficiently sourced and referenced, but it's really about breaking through and trying to traverse the mental plane, isn't it? As I've actually seen an album by Transillusion about the mental plane. It's all very interesting. And plainly put, I think we do have a great interest in ourselves, and we want to progress our knowledge beyond a certain milestone quite frequently. And sometimes we sift through it. Sometimes we don't sift through people's thoughts and think, well, actually, that's original and that's not. Sometimes we just sift through it and it falls through a sieve like an empty hole. So there are, of course, yes, there are many interesting concepts to introduce. And it's all very artistic. I realise that artists tend to create an impression of other things. It's quite interesting. I've actually witnessed a few artists in my recently who have been producing their own artwork based on pictures, which is copying off pictures, but they've been adding their own touches to it. And I thought, some of these are quite decent, So, whether I would have been interested in these in the past or not is another matter. But past and future, and it's like there's nothing in the middle. Everything all crumbles. I suppose anyone could have created an abstract piece to represent dominoes painting that concept, could they? I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if the concepts that I produce are things that cannot explicitly be drawn, but then we do wonder about the statistical probabilities of the number of ideas we can generate, such as the number of hypothesized moves in chess. Actually, it is just a hypothesis. As with many scientific endeavours, it's all quite a grand hypothesis, a grand scheme, isn't it? But then again, I just sort of replaced the word hypothesis for scheme. It's almost as though I'm creating my own form of propaganda. At least I'm self-acknowledging of this idea, principle, or fact, whichever word you choose of the three. So this is all very interesting. I think I'll settle for that. I don't need to be too grandiose. I think really, if you know, it seems a bit bizarre that we would look into the subject or the principle of what metal is. For example, I went into a butcher's the other day and I was told that I had counted the wrong change when in fact I was absolutely sure, because I was staring at the coins intently, that I had actually counted it correctly. I said, well, you know, maybe it's the reflection of the coin that threw me off. And then he said something, and then I agreed, something about the strips or whatever. But I thought that was interesting because, you know, is it the case that people who are accused of copying off others, or people who are copied off themselves, it's kind of a double negative, isn't it? Is it the case that, you know, they delude themselves into thinking that there's some overall surface to their mind? Is that a delusion? It's only a question I throw there because I'm not even condemning myself. Certainly I'm not a copycat, although it doesn't mean that occasionally as a child I didn't think an idea was good and wished to voice it, you know, with the rest of the crowd, but I certainly never was intentional of taking away from anyone else. And certainly some of the language I use, usually it's quite nuanced because it's trying to balance a certain perspective. And yes, most of this is from my mind, although some of the indents, some of the facts, shall we say, the thoughts that I've recovered from my mind based on the previous conversation within the last second, even though it wasn't a second. As Nintendo minute is never a minute, they say. You know, I quite like that. Am I actually allowed to say that in this video? I do not know. You know, I try and follow the rules. I try and credit other people, so it's quite important. Certainly, I think as we're progressing into the future, we need to be less petty and worry more about eugenics and the gene pool, because if we relegate our fascination to, you know, things that don't matter, we're going to forget about the manipulative processes that we're involving ourselves with, and certainly we will never be graced by a presence from an alien race if we are deemed unworthy, and particularly in the social manner that transcends even the gene pool. So this causes a bit of a problem, doesn't it? And yes, I came up with that off the top of my head based on visual logic. See, there's plenty of visual logic to go around, and the problem is it's almost like we're cutting holes in other people's work on a visual level, while other people accelerate rapidly with their own wormy little language. You know, and we look at the different languages, we see many squiggles. In fact, I actually called Arabic squiggle squiggle. I thought that was quite a funny way of saying it, but you know, and it looks like it looks like the work of flies actually, which is quite interesting. But as the Quran says, you know, Allah sees us with a similitude to a gnat. Obviously, I don't want to unduly reference the Quran because I think that's inappropriate. I don't think I should be referencing the Quran because it's offensive to people if I make a mistake, and certainly I cannot make the claim that I'm some kind of Islamic scholar, but I certainly am knowledgeable of that quote. I may not have said it exactly, but then the language is slightly different between the English and the Arabic version anyway. In fact, there are different versions circulating in this side of the world, you know, against certain communities and organisations which wish to preserve the righteousness of their own principles, but obviously they realise that they have to cut away at those principles and replace it with a new principle, taking the new out of the old and so on, the beginning and the end. It's all, you know, but then we end up relegating our fascination. I've used this term in my own mind before, relegating fascination. It's my own kind of expression. It's just, why am I so transfixed on a domino? Is this... Is as they might put it, as Saudi Arabia, they're not fond of gambling, are they? Although at the same time, they probably are, because in certain social circles they are. But it's just it's a question, isn't it? You know, am I gambling by focusing on an image? Is that the point? Is that the point that you were trying to make? So that's been very interesting. Thank you for your time.